Actually, I want to hear your take on the first sale. I want to hear the story of the messenger.
The origins of the story,
Yeah, John mentioned that you came up with the idea.
I did. I came up with the idea. I'm the accidental novelist. I had absolutely no intentions whatsoever of being a writer. It was never part of my game plan. I was always an artist. I was always a creative. My mother was a pretty famous painter growing up. My father was a college professor, and I grew up around artists and intellectuals and weirdos. And so I always knew I was going to be in the arts. Thought I was going to be a visual. Well, I was a visual artist first. I was a cartoonist, and then I became a musician when I was 14 and learned to play the guitar. And I went to the Atlanta College of Art, out of high school. What are you going to do with your life? And tried that for a year, and then that pretty much convinced me that I didn't want to be an artist. And so ended up going to the Berklee College of Music, and I got into the Berklee College of Music with no formal musical education whatsoever, which is really hard to do. But I had this 6-song demo that I had written and co-produced and performed on, and that was my audition tape to get in, and that got me in. And they actually tried to talk me out of it. I was literally packing my girlfriend's car, getting ready to drive to Boston to go, what is going on? Am I in or not? And the phone rang, and it was the admissions department at Berklee. And, very nice lady on there, and she's like, well, the program here is really difficult. It's really, and it's true, it is. It's a musical boot camp. But she said she was really trying to talk me into, maybe taking a couple of semesters at a community college or something just to get the basics of music theory, because it's such a rigorous program. And I'm on the phone, and I'm like all of 19 years old. I'm like, you don't understand, I'm packing my car. I'm about to drive up there and knock on you guys' door and ask you why I haven't heard back from you. And I'm like, am I in? Yes or no? And she said, yes, you've been accepted. I'm like, fine, see you in about 8 hours. And I got in, and I loved it. I did the 4-year program in 3 years. And I graduated, and it's one of those things where I was always a very self-defined person. I knew I was going to be in the creative arts. I had no thought whatsoever of being a writer. And I was preparing myself for a career as a professional musician. It's my final semester at Berklee in Boston. And my girlfriend and I were on the T, which is the Boston subway lines, and we're riding over the Charles Street Bridge from Boston to Cambridge to go to Harvard Square to see a feel-good film festival of The Deer Hunter and Taxi Driver, which is 6 hours of light entertainment. And we were standing up in the last car on the T as it's coming up out of the tunnel over the bridge, and I'm looking at the back window at the tunnel, and I suddenly turned around to my girlfriend at the time, and I'm like, what if there was a vampire in the subways? And she'd been with me for a while, so she was kind of used to this. She's like, uh-huh. And immediately I'm, justifying my insanity, and I'm like, no, wait, think about it. If he's a vampire, and I was transposing it to New York, because the New York subways are infinitely scarier. And I'm like, if he's a native-born New Yorker, he's in the subways, he's perpetually buried in his native soil, so he doesn't need a coffin. All he has to do is crawl off in the tunnels and throw some dirt on him, and he's good to go. And then I'm thinking, and it's always night in the subways, so he can kill 24 hours a day, so they won't immediately think vampire, they'll think, serial killer. And if he doesn't just leave 2 neat little holes in people's necks, but he just tears them to pieces, they won't think vampire, they'll think subway psycho. And the last bit was, and you got to remember this is 82? And the last bit was, and if he's a punk, he already looks like he's dead, and nobody's going to notice the transformation. Because we see people like that all the time. And so this was the idea. Then, go marinate this in 6 hours of The Deer Hunter and Taxi Driver. And the whole ride home on the subway, I just keep thinking about it. And I get back to our apartment, and I call John. And John and I were high school friends, played bands together, and everything. And John was in New York. He had moved to New York and was he was playing in a band, but he was also really trying to break into publishing as a writer. And at that time, he had sold 2 short stories to Twilight Zone magazine. He'd sold The Long Ride and Go to Sleep, both of which ended up in our sort of short story novel hybrid thing called Deadlines. And I just called him up and I'm like, dude, I got this great idea for a short story. And I gave him the idea about it, punk vampire in the subways, why don't we write it and we can sell it to Twilight Zone magazine and make a couple $100 and this will be really great. And John's immediate reaction was, I'm busy. Because he has his own project. And I think, as I recall, I bugged him relentlessly for about 6 months. Like every time we would talk. Or I'd go down to New York to visit or something, I'd be like, what about the story? What about the story? Dude, what about the story? And finally, we were down there, my girlfriend and I were down there visiting for the weekend, and I turned around to John, I'm like, so what about the story? And as I recall, he looked at me and he's like, you know what? I'm sick of you. We're going to do this tonight. And then we're just going to go borrow a friend's apartment down in the Bowery, and we're going to write the story tonight, and then I never have to hear about this story again. And so we did. We borrowed our friend Leslie Sternberg's apartment down in the Bowery, which was also subsequently the apartment of the character in The Cleanup, our second novel. And we just stayed up all night and drank a lot of beer. John smoked a lot of pot, and we were just writing on file cards and throwing them on the floor. Just every cool idea we had. And this is, you got to remember, this is pre-internet, this is pre-computers, this is like, John, we have one typewriter between us, which belongs to John, an old Smith Corona. And, I'm just writing in longhand, but we're writing just ideas on file cards and just laying them on the floor and playing puzzle pieces with mapping out the story. And we keep coming up with all these great ideas. And by morning, we stay up all night. And by morning, we had a floor full of file cards of story beats. And we realized two fairly important things. One, there wasn't really a market for short vampire fiction. And two, because Stephen King was exploding with Salem's Lot and Anne Rice, Interview with a Vampire and everything, early 80s, there was a market for vampire novels. So we collect up all the file cards. I go back to New York, I graduate from Berkeley, and I think it was about, I don't know, it must have been about 6 or 7 weeks later. I come home one day, and there's this package in the mail. And I open it up, and it's like the first draft of the first chapter of The Light at the End. And John had just sat down and started writing the first chapter. I'm like, holy shit. And I read it, and I'm like, wow, this is great. And I call him on the phone, and we're immediately like, jamming it over the phone and talking about, and then what if we do this and this and this and this and this. And then I finish up Berkeley, and I graduate, and then I promptly, leave my fantastic apartment on Mission Hill, top 2 floors of a triple-decker with a spiral staircase and, a roof deck and big windows overlooking Fenway Park. And with my girlfriend, my poor long-suffering girlfriend, we moved to New York City into this tiny little house in Queens, in Rego Park, with John and 5 other friends. And we trade this great apartment that we had for a little 10 by 10 bedroom, in this apartment full of lunatics. And then I got a job at John's messenger service. And John was a foot messenger. They had foot messengers. They had bike messengers. They had van messengers. I didn't want to be a foot messenger because I figured I wouldn't make enough money. I didn't want to be a bike messenger because that just seemed crazy even for me. I didn't have a van, but I loved to skate. So I became, I think, the first roller skating street messenger in New York. And I can only judge that because, and this is pre-rollerblades even, just quad skates. And the entire 2 years I did that, I never saw another one. But I basically combat skated 20 miles a day in Midtown Manhattan. And it was great for a number of different reasons. As a messenger, you meet 2 kinds of people. As a messenger, it's almost like crossing escalators, You meet young people going up in life, and you meet slightly older people going down. And they all meet at that same crossroads. So you got this really interesting, eclectic bunch of lunatics who are in a messenger service in Midtown Manhattan. And that helped us a lot, helped me a lot, because I learned the city from the gutter up. And I learned every square inch of the city from gutter to penthouse. And that became really helpful just in terms of the tone and the flavor of the story. But also, it occurred to us along the way, like, who is going to be crazy enough to realize that the subway psycho is actually a vampire. And then we figured out messengers. You know, I mean, they're the only ones who are weird enough and crazy enough.
You don't have to be concerned.